Good morning. My friend Bryce Sumner, a master gardener since 2007, and I, Nancy Creveling, a master gardener since 2009, are going to talk to you today about container gardening. It's something that we're both very enthusiastic about. We've practiced it for years, and we love the flexibility that it gives us. Today we're going to talk about why you want to garden in containers, what you can plant, which containers work, and what to consider in choosing a container. Where should you put your container? How are you going to prepare your container? And oh my goodness, you're going to need special soil. How are you going to plant your container? How to expand the range of your garden in containers vertically and by clustering plant containers. We'll talk about maintenance and give you some handy tips on how to take care of your containers.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Okay, so why garden in containers? One of the wonderful things about gardening in containers is you can do it anywhere. Even if you only have a deck in an apartment that gets a little bit of sun, you can plant and grow some edibles or some ornamentals. This is also often the gateway to more serious gardening and raised beds and actually growing in the soil at your house. It's convenient to have containers. One thing I've learned is that when I go on vacation, I can have my friends babysit my container plants, and Bryce has graciously done that for me, as well as other friends that I've had who've babysat them for me. You can also control your plants. I have a great mint plant and I have it in a container. That way it's not going to spread through my whole yard, which mint can tend to do. And that's a great way to contain other plants that also could potentially want to take over your yard. It's also a great way to control the soil. A lot of us have very hard, dense clay soil. This gives you the opportunity to use a much easier soil for working, and it gives you great drainage for your plants, because a lot of plants really prefer a fast draining soil. I also have blueberries at home, and I can contain the acidity of the soil. I use special soil for my blueberries in my wine barrels, and it works out really well, and they love it. Microclimate, when it gets really hot or really cold, you can move your containers to a more sheltered place, which is very handy in Sonoma County since we do get those broad, wide extremes in temperature. Accessibility is also another pro and a really cool part about container gardening, because you can container garden on a table. You don't have to bend over. There are special containers that are built up on high legs, so you can get under there with a wheelchair, or you can sit and garden. There's just a lot of opportunity to encourage people who might otherwise not be able to physically garden, give them a chance to do that. So it's really cool.
I am going to talk about what you can plant in a container, and it's just as big as the container is, or as deep as it is. That is really your only criteria. I am going to say that in this wine barrel, which is 16 inches high, you could grow a dwarf mandarin orange, or you could grow something as small as the teeny tiniest succulent. Here we have my husband's old hiking boot that's been used, you can tell, for at least 15 years, and it's perfect for succulents. I wanted to show you what we have here. What we're doing is showing you a mixed salad barrel with flowers that are edible, herbs that are edible, and everything in here is edible. But we are doing a barrel in all of our plantings very sustainably. No herbicides, no pesticides, and no artificial fertilizers. And you don't need to use anything really but extra compost, and you end up with something also that could beautify your garden. Even if you have a huge property, you might want to have a few little planters. We have some other examples over here of completely edible, sustainable planters. Everything in this barrel is cool season. That's one thing you want to think about. You don't want to mix cool and warm season together. These guys only take 3 to 4 hours of sun. If you get into fruiting vegetables, peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, then you need 6 to 8 hours. So this was planted 5 weeks ago, and it will get better and better. And we have some that you can see later that have been in plantings for 8 weeks, and they're some almost going to seed. And you can see here we have lettuce, we have 2 kinds of kale, we have snap peas, sugar snap peas, which will go over this masonry wire. We'll talk about that. We have edible calendulas, just the petals. We have Johnny jump ups, and we have alyssum, little white alyssum. I'm not sure you can see that, but here we are, alyssum. And you might think that alyssum doesn't do much, but alyssum is a wonderful pollinator, draws little tiny pollinators. Every flower in here has a purpose. It draws pollinators. Any herbs that we put in here sometimes will confuse pests a bit, and those pests are not as vicious if they've been somewhat confused as they fly around. I think that for now, again, I would repeat that the depth of what you use is the key to what you can plant, as well as the time of year. This is all cool season. We'll be moving into warm season in a month or less maybe. But we've had a lot of rain, a lot of cold, and in spite of all that, all of these pots and baskets and our wine barrel have been out in the rain, and they have survived. So there's a world ahead of you with what you want to plant.
Okay, so now that we have you piqued your interest in growing in containers, which containers work for what applications? So you can get containers of all sizes, as Bryce showed you, depending on what you want to plant. And then also different containers have different benefits. So this is a basket that Bryce lined with black plastic and poked holes in with an ice pick. So it'll hold the water in there better than if she just gardened in a basket. Some people like those wire baskets with the moss inserts, but they go through water like crazy and you have to water them constantly. So that's something to consider. You can use wood, which is great. It insulates. It's heavy. If you want to move it around a lot, it's probably not something that you want to use unless you have a very small wooden container. Plastic is maybe not our container of choice, but if you want to move it around, it's great because it's very light. This looks like terracotta, but it's plastic. And I can move these plants that are in these 5-gallon containers easily by myself. And I'm an old person, so it's easy for me. You want to consider the aesthetic. You might want to group several smaller containers rather than doing one big container. So you can have an herb garden on your back porch and just have several containers with herbs in it, or you could have one larger container with herbs in it. You want to consider the water needs. So plastic holds water really well. You want to make sure that any container you have does have drainage. You can see the holes in this. When I bought this, the holes were not there, but you can poke the holes out of it. These containers I found came with tiny little holes. They did not drain well. So I drilled more holes, and now they would drain a lot better. Drainage is critical because one of the main horrible things that can happen to your plant is that they get root rot, and that happens when you don't have drainage. So you also want to have sides that are sloped rather than bulging out like a beautiful urn or something, because if you ever want to transplant anything, it's virtually impossible to get it out unless the sides are sloped. I have learned that the hard way. Let's see, terracotta is nice, it's beautiful, you can paint it, you can do a lot of stuff with it, but it too is heavy if you want to move it around. You've got the woven examples, and ceramic is gorgeous. You get lots of choices, but once again, it is incredibly heavy when it's full of soil, and sometimes it's heavy even when it's not full of soil. And if you want to move it, you really want to consider that. Basically, almost anything with a hole will work. So this is an old recycle bin. I have used it for beets and potatoes. It has holes in the bottom, and you could always drill more holes if you needed them. You just want it to be big enough to fit the plant that you chose, and it's kind of magic. You can grow in almost anything, and you don't have to spend a whole lot of money on a container.
So I'm going to talk about, you have your container, you've chosen it. It's not yet planted, so you can put it anywhere you want. Even this wine barrel, you would want to decide in the beginning where you want your wine barrel, because you will not be able to move that around. And so one of the considerations is, what are you planting and how much sun does it need? So these things, these cool season veggies and flowers, could handle a bit of shade, but they loved all of the winter sun. Now if you get into 6 to 8 hours needing the sun, tomatoes, peppers, etc., then you're going to need to put it in a place that will get that much sun. Another consideration is water. You don't want to be too far from the water, especially something like this. It's possible to do a drip with it. We're not getting into that today, but just for hand watering, you want to be close to a hose bib. I've done that. I've made that mistake. And these guys work so well with just something like this. Fill this, and you can water without hurting too much pressure on any of these. So that works really well. So after you've decided that you've got the right sun and the right water situated, then you want to think about the weight of it. If you are on a deck, for instance, that's what I have at home, a heavy deck. I was able to, we can put a wine barrel there if we wanted to, or we can put any size pot. That works pretty well. But then you have something like this, if it's a big pot. I have never used anything under the wine barrel other than bricks, if you want to give a little air to them, or blocks of wood. But something like this on wheels, there's lots of different ones. This looks like a very nice wrought iron one. Then it makes the pot easier to move, and maybe you like to change the look of it a bit. Or these things are very important if you have your pots on the deck, if you don't want any staining. Little saucers. If you are going to plant something in a basket like these, this guy's been around for a couple, maybe 4 plantings. It's still holding together. It has a wire rim. But I don't ever put these on the ground because they would rot out very quickly. I have a wire base that I put them on, and there's a little bit of air, and they've lasted a long time because of that. I would also think about if you're on a balcony, that's a different story. You want to think of the weight of your plants. You want to think about where somebody lives under you. Then you want to be sure that you're using an appropriate saucer so it isn't dripping into their lifestyle. The weight of the whatever your container may not be allowing you to plant everything you want to plant, but as Nancy said, you can make a little garden out of containers. Just mix some of these, and you can also gain the diversity element by planting pollinating flowers, pots of herbs right next to your veggies, and you'll get that Mother Nature's help. You want to put it so you can see it, because I think these mixtures of things are lovely additions to your landscape.
Yeah, and as the season goes along, the sun moves, and so you may want to move your plants as the season progresses to either give them more or less sun. Another thing to think about too is if you have a dark blue container like the beautiful plastic that looks like ceramic container that Bryce has brought today, those can absorb a ton of sun and they get really hot. So it might be great for tomatoes, but it's not going to be really good for the plants that don't like to get their roots real hot. Now that you know what you're planting and where you're going to put your container, how do you prepare it? If you have a container that you're reusing, which most of these are reused, you'll want to make sure that it's clean so that any insect eggs or bacteria or viruses that are not good for your plants are out of there. So for plastic, I use a 10% bleach solution, and on the large pots, I just spray it in, let it sit until basically it drains out, and then wipe it out till it's dry. For smaller pots, you can just do it in the sink with a little bit of bleach water. Once again, it's a 10% solution. If you're using a wine barrel again, they do grow fungus, I can tell you that from experience. You want to go ahead and empty out the wine barrel if you're going to get fresh soil. And when you do that, you want to spray it with just pure apple cider vinegar, and that'll help kill anything that's growing in the wood. Another thing too with wood is you want to make sure that your wood is moist, because otherwise it's just going to suck the moisture out of the soil. Water just tends to travel to different places that are dry, right, to even things out. You also, as I mentioned, you want drainage holes in whatever you're doing. If you buy a wine barrel new, you'll need to make sure that you drill some pretty good size holes in it. The soil doesn't really leak out of the drainage holes, but unfortunately little critters and redwood roots, as we found out, can grow up through the drainage hole. So we put screen in the bottom. This was used in a wine barrel. You can also, if you're more frugal, you can cut the pieces and either staple it in the wine barrel, or you can cut pieces to fit over the drainage holes in your plastic as well. You can use either this is nylon screen, or I've also used metal screen, but I think the nylon screen is probably better in that it won't rot away like the metal screen can.
So I wanted to add a little more detail to Nancy's comment about the redwood roots. She had probably 4 big bags of potting soil just waiting to be used. So they sat there a good month or month and a half.
Probably months.
Months?
Yeah.
Oh, 3 months, 4 months? Yeah. I saw the pile. And when she went to use them, the very bottom one had the redwood root had gone away from itself into the bottom bag, ripped itself in there, and was having a great time. So don't plant anything, don't put your pots anywhere near redwood roots.
Yeah, they're very aggressive.
Yeah.
Or at least have your pot up high enough that the roots won't come in.
I am going to talk about the really important key to any planting, the soil. We say as master gardeners, feed the soil rather than the plant. So the first thing that you need to know is you do not take the soil from your garden, even if it's great, because it tends to compact when it gets into a container. What you want to use is a good quality potting soil. Good quality potting soil, and then some compost. So as Nancy was saying, you have this barrel, it's got the holes in the bottom, and you are ready to fill it. What you need to do is put put some soil, potting soil down, water it, let it sit, and do that in layers all the way up. So as she said, the barrel is wet, because otherwise it'll sponge it right away from the plants. There are some plants that need a more acidic soil, like a blueberry, or if you're doing ornamentals, azaleas, clematis. So, you know, that's something you need to consider with what you're planting. But everything that we have planted, all the veggies, the flowers, the herbs, potting soil was great. You may, you'll see that before we plant, we're going to add some compost. And when you're watering a container, of course, more is going to leach out over time. So one easy reminder is just add a little compost every time you plant. Every time you water. And you'll keep a pretty, very nourishing soil here. Okay, so Nancy is our little planter. She has a new pair of gloves on, just for this. She's starting out with, we have a couple of calendulas to put into the barrel. And again, this is something that is very pretty in a salad, the petals, and it's also a little bit of a confuser for insects. And this one is in a 4-inch pot, because that's kind of what we had. We had this around for a while, but I would advise you, whenever possible, to buy things in 6-packs, because the little plants have a better start. Just, and it's economical. So Nancy's digging a hole, and she's putting some compost in there to start with. And as she takes it out of the pot, she is going to plant it at the very same level in this barrel that it came out of the pot. That's very important. And she's pulling apart it's been in there a while, but it doesn't look too bad, does it? No, good. So that's good. Yeah. And while she's doing that, she's firming it up. I wanted to say something about why we are using potting soil. I mentioned that it would not compact in a container, but it is also the beautiful combination of clay and sand. We all know we don't want clay. It needs amending, because clay's particles are so tightly together, they will smother the roots. But they hold water, and they are very nutritious. Now, the opposite is the sand. If you have a sandy soil, the water does not stay. It's gone. And it is not a nutritious soil, but it doesn't smother the roots. So potting soil is that perfect balance. And now she's putting another. We are going to only show you with a half a barrel, because it gets a little monotonous. So she's just putting this calendula on the opposite side, because later on, when we finish the barrel, we want our flowers to be, not right next to each other. It makes a nicer look. And again, she's separating the roots very gently. And she put a little compost in the hole. You did, right?
I did.
Yeah, you did. And then she's firming it up right at the same level. And then as she begins to plant more, you will see that it might seem like they're too close together, but they're not, because this soil is so nutritious, you can do that. And if you earlier on saw how full our baskets and pots are, they look beautiful. You can do that with a pot or the container. Now here we have something that's in a 6-pack. This is called a Star Mix lettuce mix. It's just a nice red mixture of the red lettuce and the green lettuce, and that just makes a beautiful pot. So she's working the soil, getting those roots happily to go into that little composted hole.
I'm going to water this a little too, because it's a little dry.
Yeah, good idea. And we traveled here with all our pots and paraphernalia, so sometimes things were kept a little drier so they wouldn't flood my car, so we're, just giving them a little drink now. and then watering each little. That's the nice thing about this spout.
Yeah, it's great.
You don't get too much wet because we don't really want to wet the leaves if we don't have to right now.
Okay, how about another color of lettuce?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And then we have some alyssum here, the tiny flowers that does draw pollinators, small pollinators.
And you'll notice that I tip the pot or tip it upside down rather than trying to pull the plant out by the
Yeah, good
down,
point.
because you can break it off that way, and it's kind of heartbreaking sometimes.
Definitely. And this lettuce is a very delicate lettuce. You know, you can, with your fingers, you could make yourself a salad. Yeah, so we'll probably plant this half over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another wonderful edible flower. These, I also wanted to say that all of our starts were organic. That was key because everything in the pot all of our pots is edible. Not that you have to do that, but another wonderful edible flower is a nasturtium. And they are beautiful, flooding over the edge, and they add a nice touch to, and sometimes people call them martyr flowers, because in some cases the aphids and little things love munching on nasturtiums. So in some cases, like they're a nice partner with squash, that idea that the squash is the thing you want most, so you plant martyr nasturtiums to take up the pests. Now this is a cilantro, and I wouldn't put those in my barrels at home because my husband hates it. So, but it's a pain to buy cilantro, and if you don't use it all, you find this soggy mess in a plastic bag in your refrigerator. So it's a wonderful thing to have in the garden. And this, the size this was a 4-inch pot. It's a good idea to start picking these off right away because they'll keep coming back. So if you wanted to make a little, a little sandwich with or have a nice taco, you could start today picking the little cilantro leaves off. There are some cilantros that are considered late bolting, and I'm not positive about this one, but that's a quality to think about when you're planting cilantro. Now here we have a bunching onion, kind of like a scallion. And these I think take something like 50 days to completely mature. But I've grown those at home and have not left them in till the end. And I've still found them interesting to pull up, and I use them.
So do I need to separate these, or can I just plant it as a
I just plant a bunch, but technically you could separate them. And then maybe a couple of alyssum, and that'll probably you get the idea. Yeah. And these reseed very easily. And you can, pick off the alyssum, put them in the salad. We also, over there, we have a lot of examples of the Johnny Jump Ups. We're not putting them in this one. I actually have a friend who got kind of into Johnny Jump Ups, and she had a little group of her daughter, 5, and I think they're about 4 or 5-year-olds, and they had a Johnny Jump Up petal tasting. I kid you not. And she said by the end they'd picked their Johnny Jump Up, and they were absolutely sure this was the tastiest one. And it was really kind of cute.
My grandson has the same thing. There's one he likes and the others he doesn't.
Yeah. So you never know. So you can see, again, these are close together, and you can put a lot more in here, and then you have that much more to feast on.
And the last thing we need to do is add some compost and then water it all in, right?
Right.
So I'm going to put compost around the top.
You don't really need to mulch it per se, because pretty soon when it's full, they fill in. There's no problem with weeds.
The compost will act as a mulch in the time being.
Right, and it'll help hold the water. Yeah. We haven't had to worry much about watering with all the rain, but you know, it'll be coming now. And you know, one of the ways to keep all of these containers going is to do something called cut and come again. And I could show you just with this lettuce, because these are so easily you want to leave about an inch, and you can start, well, those would be good examples. You could make a whole salad off little parts of that. And I actually took one of the large mustard leaves on one of those pots, and it's past its prime as far as it's a little bit, you know, very spicy. But I just cut it into smaller pieces and put it in the salad, and it was yummy. I mean, it was a whole mixture of things. And with the cut and come again, you also can make a pot like this friendly to planting Swiss chard, which, you know, you could take up the whole barrel could be filled with the Swiss chard. But if you start early with the baby leaves, you could keep it going a long time without it taking over. It could be part of another mixture.
And now I'm going to go ahead and water this in. So here's an example of why you want a container garden. There's mint growing all over here.
Oh yeah, that's another point. Another good reason to cluster some plants outside your big barrel is mint. Mint is a wonderful herb, but it takes over. It's even bad in a little pot without a saucer. You know, it'll go out. So, but it's a beautiful plant and nice to have in your garden. Rosemary is another one that is difficult to put in a mixture like this because it gets so big, but you can have it in a cluster pot and you get all the benefits from the insects that come, the good bugs and bad bugs. Yeah, I think that looks great.
When you get into container gardening, another way to enjoy it even more is to go vertical. It gives you a little bit more space. In this example, there's a little trellis there that I made with bamboo and some leftover fencing. And last year I had cucumbers growing up on that. It was really great. It was perfect for that, little mini cucumbers. You saw the masonry ladders that Bryce has the peas growing up on. Those also work really well for cherry tomatoes and things like that. You can also...
and they're very inexpensive.
Yeah. You can find them at basically construction places. And you can also do cord back and forth between them to get things to grow up on the cord. They're really versatile.
You can also do 2 wine barrels and connect the 2 wine barrels with 1 arch. That's quite pretty.
So yeah, and then there's also, you know, your 3 pieces of bamboo adjusted to the size of your pot and to the size of your plant that make a nice trellis as well. So there's a lot of things. It's just kind of limited by your own imagination how you can make things grow up and get a lot more crop from your plant.
And you can use that as a shade. You know, these peas would be a little taller, but we were covering it with
Bird netting?
Yeah, bird netting to protect them, and then the peas just found that to be their perfect climber item. So the peas are hanging a little bit lower, but eventually they would be up and over and would shade if you wanted to plant later in the year lettuce when it would be too hot. Whatever you had over it would act as a shader, so that's a good thing too.
You can also do the same kind of thing with cherry tomatoes. As they grow up, they'll shelter the lettuce and maybe the cilantro that doesn't like the hot weather. So it gives you a lot more adaptability.
Right.
Yeah. And now what? Okay, you don't get to just walk away. Sorry. You have to come back and check to see if things need to be watered. You want to, the good old finger test is really good. We preach that a lot in Master Gardeners. Ruins your fingernails, but it works really well. So you want to stick your finger in about an inch. And in this case, this soil feels great. It's kind of like a wrung out damp sponge. So this one wouldn't need any water. Bryce probably watered it recently.
Well, yesterday, but still,
Yeah.
yeah.
If it's dry, then you want to water it. And the watering cans with the long spouts are great because you can get underneath and water the soil rather than watering the plant, the leaves of the plant. That's another reason to use compost as a mulch because it'll help hold the water in.
Yeah, every time you water, it soaks in more.
Yeah. You also, saucer is pretty good too because as the water leaks out, sometimes if your soil's really dry, the water will go out around the edges and not get your soil moist. So it'll wick up from the saucer as well. But you don't want to leave it there too long. You want to dump out your saucer because you don't want mosquitoes and you don't want too much water wicking up. What I tend to do is I water everything, then I come back and I dump out the saucers after that. Okay. Another thing is try to water early in the morning rather than in the evening. You want the time for the water to evaporate off of the leaves of the plant, and it helps get away from things like powdery mildew and other issues that you just simply don't want to address. So irrigation is a topic all of its own if you want to do drip, and that's a topic for another class. We're not covering that. So feeding, you want to talk about feeding?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it before. You don't really need to do more than each time you water, if you want to, is add a little more compost, and you'll keep the nutrition going. And I would say for pests, the best thing to do is to go out, as often as you can, because you can stop a lot of things just by seeing the very beginnings of them. And with aphids, I just smash them. Because it's only when they've gotten a real hold that you have sometimes a disaster and you can't do anything except pull it out. But yeah. I think going out often is the key.
Yeah. Earwigs are always a problem at my house.
Oh yeah, this is a good one.
Yeah, so these are just used yogurt containers. You can also use cat food cans or tuna fish cans and put them in the soil so that it's, in some of them I've drilled holes in the sides. The earwigs crawl in the hole, and then you put a little soy sauce or a little bit of oil in the bottom, and they get stuck in that. They can't get out and they die, which is wonderful. You do need to clean them out every once in a while, but these are very effective. Yeah, and they also work for snails, well, for slugs. I don't know that a snail would go through, but they work pretty well for slugs also. For slugs, you might want to use a little beer, the cheapest beer you can find.
Although in containers, I think you have less issue.
Yeah.
For that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Pluses.
Yeah. Another thing that you can do with containers is if you do have snail and slug problems, this is copper tape. You can put it around your container, particularly for the wooden ones. It works well. Yeah. And this has tape on one side. Be careful, it can cut you really easily. Wear gloves when you do it. If the birds are getting your stuff, these work really well for the seedlings when they get a little bigger. These little picnic tents work really well. They let the sun in, but they keep the birds and other flying pests out. Then we have good old
this
bird
is
netting.
The bird netting that was on here, and it was quite a job to get the peas off. So you don't want to leave them on quite as long as we did,
Yeah.
but they'll be back. They'll be climbing again.
Yeah.
This is great. Yeah.
Yeah. And then if it gets too hot, And your plants can get sunburned just as we can. You can use tulle or shade cloth to put over them, and this is really handy for containers, and containers really lend themselves to that. Because if you can't move them out of the way, then you can put the shade cloth or the tulle over them.
And this is a good base.
Yeah, and the other, yeah, any kind of vertical thing is a good way to use this. And you can use clothespins to just stick it on. It works really well with the masonry ladders. And right now we're not, well, I guess we are a little worried about frost, aren't we, still? These are old-fashioned, not LED, the kind of Christmas lights we're not supposed to use, but they give off enough heat that they can protect your citrus and your blueberries and other crops from frost. So that's pretty cool. You just need a long extension cord to get out, depending where your pots are. So, any other pests that we need to talk about?
Aphids, but just
oh, aphids.
you can
Oh, yeah.
spray them.
Aphids, we have.
Just smashing them.
When the aphids are beyond the point where you want to smash them, these types of nozzles are really great. You put it on jet, turn it up really high, and just blast the aphids. And you'd be amazed. These plants are actually very resilient, and they can hold up to a lot of fast-moving water pressure. So it works really well to just blast the aphids off. You want to get under the leaves too, because that's where they tend to be. If you see curled up leaves, look for aphids. Smush or blast.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Happy birthday.